Mark James Kilroy was born on March 5, 1968 in Chicago, Illinois to Jim Kilroy, a chemical engineer, and Helen Kilroy, a devoted homemaker who also volunteered as a paramedic. Jim's career required him to move across Texas and New Mexico, working on different oil refineries and plants. Helen, on the other hand, dedicated herself to raising their two sons, Mark and Keith. Even as a preschooler, Mark stood out for his kindness, talent, and compassion. When he was just 5 years old, he came home from kindergarten with a handwritten note for his parents, promising them a special treat. After dinner that evening, little Mark proudly read aloud from his school book. Both Jim and Helen were astonished at how well Mark could read for his age. Later, when he was 10, he even made his sick grandfather a nativity scene using popsicle sticks.
By 1974, the Kilroys had settled in Santa Fe, Texas, where they lived in a small home surrounded by a vast 5-acre farmland. They raised livestock including cows, goats, chickens, and also had a few horses. Jim also loved to spend time around his garden where he grew various crops. From the very beginning, the Kilroys were a deeply religious Catholic family. They regularly attended Our Lady of Lourdes Catholic Church in the nearby town of Hitchcock. Mark too showed strong signs of his faith in God from an early age. His father later recalled that he would often check on his room to make sure that he was studying, only to find Mark reading the Bible instead. Mark also shared a deep bond with his younger brother Keith. Once during his college years, Mark was involved in a serious accident that left him hospitalized. His only concern at the time wasn't his own pain or recovery, but the thought that if he had died, he wouldn't have had the chance to tell his brother how much he loved him. In Santa Fe, Mark attended the local school where he thrived both academically and athletically. He was an active member of the Boy Scouts of America, served as vice president of his school's student council, and played on the school's basketball team. Many of Mark's closest lifelong friends were made during his school years, and he stayed in touch with them long after graduation. He also played baseball and golf, but basketball was where he truly excelled. His coach Terry Roy fondly remarked on Mark's athletic skills, saying, "He was an excellent guard and had real good speed, quick speed, and could handle the ball really well. You always knew that whatever he was doing out there, if it was Mark, it would be okay." In 1986, Mark graduated from Santa Fe High School, ranking 14th out of a class of 210 students. By this time, he had grown into a tall young man with blonde hair and what many described as a winning smile. His teacher, Frank Napoli, remembered him warmly, saying, "Even when you chewed him out and he deserved it, and he knew he deserved it, he would just flash that smile." He showed a lot of respect for his family. They were very close, and his parents stayed in touch with his teachers. He respected authority very much. He was the one that would say, "Yes, sir," "No, sir." It was evident that respect was a family tradition. It was expected.
After graduating, Mark began his college journey at Southwest Texas State University in San Marcos. However, his stay there was brief. Thanks to a recommendation from his coach, Ray Mark, he earned a basketball scholarship and transferred to Tarleton State University in Stevensville. During his time at Tarleton, Mark played basketball for the college team and was also an active member of the Lambda Chi Alpha fraternity. Within the fraternity, Mark was known as the all-American boy next door, the kind of person who would give you the shirt off his back without a second thought. Friends described him as friendly, dependable, and always willing to lend a helping hand. At that stage in his life, Mark was still discovering his direction and exploring different interests, which may explain his frequent transfers between universities. Over time, his passion began to shift towards medicine. He eventually decided to step away from athletics and focus on medical studies instead. After 2 years at Tarleton State University, Mark transferred once again, this time to the University of Texas at Austin, where he pursued a pre-med degree with a goal of one day becoming a doctor. Mark had also begun preparing for the highly competitive medical college admission test, or MCAT. With spring break just around the corner, Mark wanted to unwind and take a breather before his upcoming exams. He was already halfway through his spring semester and had maintained a solid 3.0 GPA.
For spring break, Mark had already been planning a trip with his high school friend Bradley Moore. Like Mark, Bradley was a sophomore majoring in electrical engineering at Texas A&M University. Even though Mark was studying in Austin and Bradley lived in Bryan, the two stayed in touch, calling each other at least twice a week. Both had spent their previous spring breaks at South Padre Island, though not together, and this year they decided it was finally time to share the experience. Bradley's exams wrapped up on March 9th, 1989. The very next day, he drove to Austin to pick up Mark, who had just celebrated his 21st birthday. From there, the two set out on a nearly 200-mile drive to Santa Fe, where they met up with two other friends, Bill Huddleston and Brent Martin. On the way, Mark and Bradley chatted about cars and their plans for the upcoming summer. Bradley later recalled, "We talked about how it would probably be our last summer at home together." For context, if Mark had succeeded in his upcoming MCAT, he would get preoccupied with long study hours and medical training. This spring break was meant to be one last moment of freedom before Mark and his friends step into professional life. What Mark didn't know was that this trip would in fact be his last spring break ever.
All of Mark's friends were athletic, tall, and clean-cut, the kind of guys who took their studies seriously and stayed away from drugs. Though young and eager to have fun, they weren't reckless. Shortly after midnight, the four friends set off to South Padre Island in Brent's Oldsmobile Cutlass. A thick fog blanketed the roads that night, so they drove carefully and made 2 stops along the way to grab bites to eat. What was normally a 6-hour, 400-mile trip ended up taking them about 9 hours to complete. By mid-morning on Saturday, March 11, 1989, the boys checked into the Sheraton Hotel on South Padre Island. The hotel was already preparing for a flood of tourists that spring. The furniture in the lobby was even removed to make space for the crowds. Mark and his friends, however, had arrived early just before the spring break rush began. Even back in 1989, South Padre Island was one of the most popular spring break destinations in the U.S., drawing nearly 250,000 students from across the country to its pristine beaches. After checking in, the boys freshened up, grabbed a quick meal, and headed straight for the beach. Before long, the island transformed into a massive party hub. There were DJs, movies, and even a surf simulator ride, all sponsored by major beer companies. One of the sponsors even offered free access to a swimming pool for students willing to appear in a filmed commercial, and the boys happily joined in. That evening, they met a group of girls from Purdue University who were staying in an adjoining room, and together they partied until dawn.
By Sunday, the boys had already settled into a rhythm. Their days started early at the beach, followed by lunch, and then more time spent behind the Sheraton, where the daily Miss Tan Line contests were held. The local police had warned organizers against any nudity, but when the event coordinator tried to stop contestants from taking off their tops, the crowd went wild. Needless to say, South Padre was a carefree paradise where students from across the country came to forget their routines and live without limits, even if it was just for a short period of time. Later in the afternoon, the boys would return to their hotel and attempt to take short naps, though they rarely succeeded. The day never ended there. Evenings meant new plans and more adventures. Sunday night, Mark and his friends decided to cross the border into Matamoros, Mexico. On the way there, they stopped for dinner at the Sonic Drive-In in Port Isabel, where they struck up a conversation with a group of girls from the University of Kansas. Coincidentally, the girls were also headed to Matamoros, so they all decided to travel together. Once across the border, they spent the night at Sgt. Pepper's, a popular local bar filled with music, dancing, and spring breakers from both sides of the border. As the night wound down, the boys and girls eventually parted ways and returned to their hotels. Monday was yet another amazing day for the boys at the beach. Mark even struck up a conversation with one of the Miss Tan Line contestants, who was a student from Southwest Texas State University. Later that evening, the group dropped by a condo party hosted by some of Mark's former fraternity friends from Tarleton State.
By around 10:30 p.m., they decided to head back to Matamoros. They parked their car on the U.S. side and walked across the bridge. That night, something extraordinary happened. The northern lights were visible as far as south of the Texas border. It was such a rare spectacle that a weather service forecaster even called it a once-in-a-lifetime event. The border town was bursting with energy. Around 15,000 spring breakers packed the streets and sidewalks that night. Bars along Avenida Alvaro Obregon flaunted signs advertising cheap margaritas and beers to luring crowds of partying students. Once across the bridge, Mark and his friends searched for a spot with the shortest line. They settled on Los Sombreros, a neon-drenched bar where the music thumped so loud that it rattled the walls. What they didn't know was that the place had a dark past. In July of 1988, the son of another local club owner had been gunned down there, reportedly by a member of the Hernandez gang known as El Dube, his real name Alvaro de Leon Valdez. A Matamoros police officer investigating him soon disappeared after and was never seen again. Interestingly, such violence and vanishings weren't out of the ordinary in Matamoros, but for oblivious American tourists, it was an unseen danger. Tragically, Mark Kilroy would soon become one of nearly 60 people who vanished from Matamoros in the first 3 months of 1989.
After spending some time at Los Sombreros, the group moved on to the London pub, which had temporarily been renamed Hard Rock Cafe for spring break, not to be confused with the chain of Hard Rock cafes here in the States. The music there was even louder. Mark mingled with a few girls, and for a while his friends lost sight of him in the crowd. Around 2 a.m., Bill began feeling tired and suggested they call it a night. When Bill, Bradley, and Brent finally stepped outside, they spotted Mark leaning against a Volkswagen, chatting with the same girl from the Miss Tan Line contest. The streets were still packed, but the party energy had turned into exhaustion. Everyone was heading towards their hotels. Bill wasn't feeling well, so he walked slowly. Mark stayed back just to keep him company. Bradley and Brent had gone ahead and waited near Garcia's, a local souvenir shop close to the bridge. As the group moved forward, Mark stopped briefly on the doorstep of a private home to say goodbye to the girl he was talking with. Just then, Bill ducked behind a tree to relieve himself. He heard a voice call out, "Hey, don't I know you?" Bill didn't think much of it. He assumed it was someone recognizing Mark, but when he returned from behind the tree, Mark was gone. First, Bill figured Mark had gone ahead to catch up with Bradley and Brent. Yet when he reached the two waiting near Garcia's, Mark was nowhere to be seen. The three friends searched frantically for him well into the early hours, long after the bars had closed and the once crowded streets had fallen silent. But there wasn't a single sign of Mark. The next morning, they went to the U.S. consulate in Matamoros to report him missing. Vice Consul Michael O'Keefe tried to reassure them, suggesting that Mark was probably just drunk, sleeping off in a cell or with a girl somewhere. But Mark's friends knew him better than that. He was not the type of person to disappear without a word or to cause his friends to worry, so refusing to give up, they kept searching Matamoros. Their efforts led nowhere. Hoping for better results, they tried the police station at South Padre Island, but were met with the same indifferent responses as at the U.S. consulate. Running out of options, the boys decided to call Mark's parents. Mark's father, Jim, quickly contacted his brother Ken, who was a U.S. Customs agent. Ken initially believed that Mark might have landed himself in a Mexican jail overnight. To be sure, he reached out to John Hensley, the Assistant Regional Commissioner for the U.S. Customs Pacific area. John Hensley in turn contacted a friend who promised to get in touch with the Cameron County Sheriff's Office in Brownsville, Texas. Meanwhile, Mark's parents also reached out to the U.S. Border Patrol. But despite all their efforts, no trace of Mark could be found. Lieutenant George Gavito of the Cameron County Sheriff's Office quickly assembled a task force of 4 sheriff's deputies and 6 Border Patrol agents to search for Mark. But even with their combined efforts, the results were frustratingly the same. By this time, Mark's parents had reached Brownsville. Jim personally visited the U.S. consulate to file an official report about his missing son, where he spoke with the director. But the director told him that the Matamoros police could not be trusted, that the officers there were barely paid $150 a month, and in many cases, the officers ended up taking bribes from criminals. The search grew more desperate, and Mark's friends were even asked to sit with a hypnotist, hoping to recover any overlooked memories that might lead to him. With some luck, Bill recalled a young Hispanic man wearing a blue plaid shirt and bearing a scar across his face talking to Mark just before he vanished. It was the same man who had said, "Hey, don't I know you from somewhere?"
What no one knew at the time was that Mark was being watched on the night of March 13th by members of the Hernandez family, a group that was part of a larger satanic cult led by a man named Adolfo de Jesus Costanzo. Now, Adolfo wasn't just any criminal. He called himself a priest of Palo Mayombe, which is an Afro-Cuban religion that traditionally involves animal sacrifices. But Adolfo had twisted its teachings into something even darker and more evil. He believed that human sacrifices could grant even greater power. He also had several relationships with members of his own cult, both men and women. Adolfo had gained massive influence across multiple smuggling rings along the US-Mexico border with his beliefs. His followers, already living in constant fear, were even willing to give him hundreds of thousands of dollars for his so-called divine protection. He was even called Godfather by his believers. The Hernandez family became involved with Adolfo's cult after a shooting. Leader Elio Hernandez Rivera sought to find protection that went beyond the reaches of the law. They were drawn to Adolfo's promise of power and safety through dark rituals. His talks of supernatural protection sounded convincing enough for them to join his cult and take part in the satanic ceremonies. Elio even offered Adolfo half of his family's drug proceeds in exchange for his criminal contacts and supernatural protection for his family. Adolfo had specifically asked the Hernandez family for a superior brain for his next ritual. He instructed them to find a typical gringo, and Mark's tall, blonde appearance fit the description perfectly. Throughout the day of March 13, 1989, Elio's nephew, Serafin, was on the lookout for someone who matched that profile. He had already attempted to abduct 2 men earlier in the day but failed both times. When he spotted Mark later that night, he decided he wouldn't make that same mistake again.
Mark's parents made desperate efforts to find their son. Fearing that he was already dead, they traveled to the Rio Grande Valley to continue their search. There, they distributed more than 20,000 handouts across the region and offered a $15,000 reward for any information leading to his whereabouts. Friends and supporters from Santa Fe traveled to Matamoros to assist the Kilroys in their search. Some of Mark's neighbors even organized garage sales and car washes to raise money for the family. By Friday, March 17, 1989, reports began to surface of tourists being attacked in Matamoros, along with another case involving a severely beaten student who was taken to a Brownsville medical center. Interestingly, this student claimed to have been mugged in the same area where Mark was last seen. There was also additional reports of assaults in the region, but none provided any leads regarding Mark's disappearance. As the situation grew more serious, federal authorities deployed helicopters and all-terrain vehicles to scour the Rio Grande, which separates Texas from Mexico. Despite this large-scale search effort, no trace of Mark was found. Mark's parents also turned to the media for help, and on March 26, his case was featured on national television on the crime show America's Most Wanted. The broadcast brought national attention to Mark's disappearance and pushed authorities to intensify their search efforts. While U.S. officials praised the Mexican federal police for their cooperation, they distrusted the state and municipal officials and suspected possible corruption or insider involvement in Mark's case. Following the television broadcast, law enforcement received hundreds of phone calls from people claiming to have information, but none of these tips led to any breakthroughs. During this time, Mark's mother, Helen, was also contacted by a woman who falsely claimed to be holding Mark captive. It was later discovered that the woman, along with several accomplices, were attempting to extort money from the grieving family. Police tracked down the group, arrested the perpetrators, and uncovered that they had a prior history of similar scams targeting victims' families. The major breakthrough in this case came on April 1st, 1989. A group of Mexican federal officers were conducting a routine drug checkpoint when they noticed a vehicle speeding past. Instead of activating their sirens and pursuing it openly, the officers chose to follow discreetly in an unmarked vehicle. The speeding car eventually stopped at the Santa Elena Ranch, a property located just outside Matamoros and owned by the Hernandez gang. The officers observed from a distance as the driver entered the ranch. After about 30 minutes, the same vehicle left the property and drove back towards the city. The ranch itself spanned nearly 100 acres. Though it contained livestock and patches of greenery, it was mostly surrounded by barren desert. The most notable structure on the property was a small shack, roughly 15 by 25 feet in size. The driver was later identified as Serafin, but at the time, police had no indication that he or the cult had any connection to Mark's disappearance. When Serafin left the property, officers entered the ranch to investigate and gather evidence related to any potential criminal activity taking place there. Inside, they discovered about 66 pounds of weed, confirming that the ranch was being used as part of a drug smuggling operation. The ranch's caretaker, Domingo Reyes Bustamante, was then questioned and shown a photograph of Mark Kilroy. To the officer's surprise, he admitted that he had seen Mark at the ranch weeks earlier and pointed towards the small shack. He told them he had prepared a meal of eggs for Mark and had last seen him about 3 to 4 weeks ago, which coincided perfectly with the timing of Mark's disappearance.
When police entered the shack, they were met with an unimaginably gruesome scene. Blood was smeared across the floor, and the room was littered with cigars, coconut shells, liquor bottles, electrical tape, a hammer, and a machete stained with dried blood. Even more disturbing were 3 cauldrons found inside the shack, filled with pennies, gold beads, chicken parts, a goat's head, and scattered bones. But the most horrifying discovery was a 4th cauldron, a large iron pot containing wooden sticks, coins, a horseshoe, herbs, chicken feet, a turtle, a goat's head, and a human brain submerged in animal blood. It was later confirmed that the human brain belonged to Mark Kilroy. The scene at the ranch looked as though it had been taken straight out of a horror film, yet it was all real. What the authorities had uncovered wasn't fiction. It was a gruesome black magic ritual brought to life. The feds temporarily left the scene so that the ritual site could be spiritually cleansed before the investigation continued. To do this, they summoned a man known for his cleansing practices. He arrived with an assortment of ritual tools including pepper, white candles, and pods of garlic and began performing a purification ceremony intended to dispel the darkness that covered the ranch. Once the ritual was complete and the area was deemed spiritually neutralized, the investigators resumed their work.
On April 9th, authorities returned to the ranch with additional officers and carried out multiple arrests. Among those taken into custody were Seraphine, his uncle Elio, the ranch's caretaker Domingo, as well as other cult members. What struck investigators most was how unfazed the suspects seemed at first. They remained calm, even confident, claiming that their rituals had granted them protection from harm and that the police could do nothing to them. But all the courage disappeared for Seraphine, who, just 2 days into the interrogation, revealed everything. Over the previous 9 months, the cult carried out the murders of 15 men, most of whom were used as part of rituals at the ranch. Every victim was male, and this included fellow cult members, rivals, one missing police officer, and tragically, Mark Kilroy. During interrogation, Seraphine confessed that these killings were ordered by Adolfo, the cult's leader. He then gave a chilling confession about Mark's final hours, beginning in the early hours of March 14th. Mark had been abducted by Seraphine and another cult member in a truck near Matamoros. A short distance down the road, one of the men stopped to relieve himself. Mark seized this opportunity to try to escape. But before he could get far, another vehicle driven by the cult's accomplices intercepted him. They held Mark at gunpoint, restrained him again, and placed him in the back of the car. Mark was then taken to the Santa Elena ranch, where the caretaker Domingo gave him food. About 12 hours after his abduction, Adolfo arrived with several other followers. They bound Mark's hands behind his back, covered his face and mouth with duct tape, and marched him through the field. Throughout the night, Mark was tortured and essayed. Afterwards, Mark was led out into a field where Adolfo killed him with a machete. Even in death, the brutality continued. Mark's skull was split open and his brain was removed and boiled in a ritual cauldron.
On Tuesday, April 11th, 1989, Seraphine and his accomplices were taken back to the Santa Elena ranch under police custody. Held at gunpoint, Seraphine was ordered to identify the burial sites of his victims. As officers began digging where he pointed, they uncovered Mark's remains, though they immediately noticed that his legs were missing. When questioned about this, Seraphine explained that Mark's legs had been amputated simply to make burial easier in the shallow grave. Investigators also discovered a wire that had been inserted into Mark's spine. The cult members claimed that this was done to aid in removing the bones after decomposition. They did the same with their other slayings, and after removing the bones, continued to disrespect the dead by using their spinal columns to create so-called good luck charms. During the extensive search of the property, Mexican authorities also made several major seizures. They recovered 243 pounds of weed, 108 grams of coke, 12 firearms including 3 submachine guns, and 11 vehicles, some of which were equipped with telephones. The following day, the detainees were brought to the headquarters of the Mexican Federal Judicial Police in Matamoros for an informal press conference. More than 250 international journalists were present at the scene to document the horrifying revelations. The 4 main suspects, Seraphine, his uncle Elio, and other cult members were paraded onto the building's balcony where they faced a barrage of questions from reporters. During the session, Seraphine publicly stated that his role in Mark's murder was only the abduction. He identified Adolfo as the one who had personally carried out the killing. The reporters also documented distinctive arrow-like cuts on Elio's back, shoulder, arms, and chest. These markings were reportedly ritual symbols granted only to high-ranking cult members who had been authorized to perform the human sacrifices.
2 weeks later, in the early morning hours, the Mexican Federal Police returned to the Santa Elena ranch to mark a symbolic and final end to the cult's operations. Alongside the officers was a curandero, a traditional folk healer brought in to spiritually cleanse the site that had become synonymous with death and dark rituals. After they completed the purification rites, the police poured gasoline around the shack and set it ablaze. When Adolfo saw footage of his sacred ritual site burning on television, he was said to have been enraged. Although the Mexican authorities never released an official statement explaining their actions, internal sources confirmed that the decision was motivated by supernatural concerns. Police reportedly wanted to eliminate any lingering evil tied to the site and at the same time deal a blow to Adolfo since they believed he had a deep connection to the ranch. Adolfo, the man behind the whole operation, remained on the run. In fact, on April 11th, the same day that authorities uncovered the bodies, Adolfo fled with several of his close associates, one being Sara Aldrete, known as the Godmother, Martin Quintana Rodriguez, who was Adolfo's lover, Omar Francisco Orea Ochoa, and Alvaro, known as El Dubi. The group first hid in a hotel in Brownsville, Texas, before later flying to Mexico City. Adolfo was last seen driving a 1989 Mercedes-Benz in Brownsville before disappearing across the border. In response, Mexican and U.S. law enforcement agencies launched an international manhunt for the now notorious cult leader. Investigators initially suspected that Adolfo might have fled to Miami, where his mother lived. She had played a significant role in shaping his beliefs and had introduced him to occult practices. However, despite thorough searches and multiple tips, no sightings of Adolfo were ever reported in Miami. There were also rumors circulating that Adolfo had been spotted in Chicago. Meanwhile, Sara Aldrete, the cult's main recruiter and other leader, was reportedly seen near schools in the Rio Grande Valley. Witnesses claimed she had vowed to abduct children in retaliation for every cult member who'd been jailed. Some later reports even suggest that Sara displayed signs of multiple personality disorder.
Although none of these sightings were confirmed or led to arrests, authorities continued to encourage the public to report any possible leads. Around the same time, Adolfo's residences in Matamoros were raided by law enforcement. Inside, investigators discovered another ritual altar, several religious artifacts, and walls stained with blood. Following these findings, the Cameron County Sheriff's Office formally indicted Adolfo and Sara on charges of aggravated kidnapping. In addition, a state grand jury indicted both of them, along with 11 other individuals, on multiple drug trafficking charges, including importing weed, conspiracy to import weed, conspiracy to possess with intent to distribute, and possession with intent to distribute. On April 17, 1989, agents from the DEA and the Texas Department of Public Safety arrested Seraphine's father, also named Seraphine, in Brownsville. He was charged with possession of weed and conspiracy alongside two other cult associates, Martin Quintana Rodriguez and Maulio Fabio Ponce Torres, both of whom were not yet arrested. Maulio had directly assisted Seraphine Jr. in the abduction of Mark, while Martin, one of Adolfo's close followers and lovers, had fled with him after the ranch discovery. When federal agents searched the property, they seized cash and firearms, but found no solid evidence linking him directly to Adolfo's cult activities. In exchange for a lenient sentence, Seraphine Sr. agreed to cooperate with authorities in their ongoing manhunt for Adolfo. He ultimately served only 18 months in prison and was released in June of 1990, returning quietly to Brownsville, Texas after his release. Authorities also believed that Adolfo had purchased multiple properties in Houston. He was also reported to be part of a failed $20 million coke operation that had been busted in June of 1988. Despite this, there were no sightings of Adolfo in Houston. When his main Houston home was raided, the authorities found ritualistic candles, an altar, and paperwork with Seraphine Sr.'s name on it.
On April 17, 1989, authorities in Mexico City raided another one of Adolfo's properties. Inside, they uncovered explicit adult material in a concealed ritual chamber containing an altar. Investigators began questioning members of the local community in hopes of tracing Adolfo's whereabouts. No one was arrested at the scene except Maria Teresa Quintana Rodriguez, the sister of Adolfo's lover, Martin. Mexican authorities also discovered a purse and several belongings of Sara, which led them to suspect that Adolfo might have killed her. However, U.S. authorities believed this was merely a ploy to make it appear as if she was dead. On April 24th, two more cult members were arrested. Shortly thereafter, law enforcement received a promising lead about a suspicious address in the Veronica Anzores neighborhood. A team of 16 officers was sent to the area. The officers questioned a shoemaker working at a supermarket who claimed to have seen a woman resembling Sara in the vicinity. Months later, the officers spotted a man purchasing a large amount of groceries using US dollars. Rather than apprehending him, the officers tailed him to an apartment at Rio Sena Street. Over the next couple of days, he was identified as Alvaro El Dubi, one of Adolfo's accomplices who had fled with him from Brownsville.
The authorities made their big move on May 6, 1989. They had surrounded the apartment on Rio Sena, but waited for the traffic to subside so that Adolfo wouldn't flee through some back door and get mixed up in the crowd. As officers moved to inspect a black vehicle parked in front of the complex, Adolfo spotted them from the window and panicked. He immediately opened fire on federal agents from above. He even threw gold coins and paper money from the window and burnt some on the stove, but he quickly ran out of ammunition. After about 45 minutes, sensing his imminent capture and the consequences he'd face for countless crimes and slayings that he'd committed, he ordered Alvaro to kill him alongside his lover, Martine. At first, Alvaro hesitated, but Adolfo hit him in the face and yelled that if he didn't do what he was told, he'd burn in hell. Adolfo then hugged Martine inside a closet as Alvaro opened fire with a machine gun, killing the two men on the spot. When the police climbed up to the apartment complex, Sara came out crying that Adolfo was dead. Alvaro later confessed that Adolfo had lost his mind and kept repeating that everything was lost and that no one was going to have his money. So, in a desperate attempt to reach hell quickly, he ordered his man to kill him.
The police arrested several of the cultists present at the scene that day. All of those individuals were charged with homicide, criminal association, assaulting an officer, and damage to the property. 2 suspects who directly played a role in Mark's abduction were never caught. This was Malio, whom we mentioned earlier, as well as Seraphine's uncle. Malio was once pulled over by sheriff's deputies in Brownsville, but was allowed to go free since his name hadn't been disclosed by the Mexican authorities. But that wasn't all. The police chief was also found to be involved in Adolfo's cult dealings. He was indicted for drug trafficking on June 2, 1989, after several cult members revealed that he had acted as their accomplice within the police force. Sara even claimed that Adolfo had committed 2 murders on his behalf. However, the chief denied these accusations, insisting that his connection to Adolfo was purely religious.
On August 27, 1989, Omar Francisco Araya Ochoa, one of the cult's key members captured at Adolfo's final hideout, was admitted to a hospital after being diagnosed with AIDS. The Mexican authorities had identified both Omar and Sara as Adolfo's lovers, though Sara herself was never found to be infected. Omar's condition rapidly deteriorated, and on Sunday, February 11, 1990, he died from a heart attack. In August of 1990, Alvaro was sentenced to 30 years in prison for killing Adolfo and Martine. Domingo, the caretaker of the ranch, was charged with aiding in the cover-up but was released on December 11, 1990 after posting just $500 of bail. Sara, the cult's infamous godmother, received a 62-year prison sentence on May 3, 1994. The cult members who were captured alongside her each were convicted on separate murder charges and received 35-year sentences. The remaining cult members were handed 67-year sentences each. Their convictions included multiple counts of homicide, organized crime, police impersonation, illegal possession of firearms, possession of restricted military weapons, narcotics trafficking, and unlawful body desecration. 4 years later, on March 27, 1998, a Mexican court reduced the sentences by 17 years. This was in line with the country's legal standards since the death penalty and life sentences are not part of the Mexican judicial system, and inmates who receive terms exceeding 50 years often have them reduced upon appeal. After their convictions, nearly all imprisoned cult members continued to claim innocence. Sara went as far as saying she would never ask the public for forgiveness, insisting she was innocent and that she believed in God. She alleged that she had been beaten to confess, so severely that doctors later told her she could never be able to have children. In the early 2000s, she even published an autobiography filled with similar declarations of innocence. This autobiography also said that Omar was actually injected with HIV while in captivity. The other cultists also made similar claims of innocence, but investigations proved them to be nothing more than fabricated stories. So much for their so-called protection ritual. Needless to say, the cult has long since dissolved into nothingness. Yet, Nearly 4 decades later, Mark's legacy continues to speak louder than the cult's infamy.
Mark's memorial service was held on April 13, 1989. Originally, this was planned as a prayer gathering to revive hope for his safe return, but then was turned into a memorial ceremony by April 12th, just 1 day after his body was discovered. The service took place at a church that he had been to since a child, Our Lady of Lourdes Catholic Church in Hitchcock, attended by many heartbroken local residents. Nearly 150 children gathered outside the church, tying yellow ribbons to a tree in Mark's memory. Mark's friends attended the ceremony and spoke heartfelt words, holding back tears as they remembered the times that they shared with him.
People from across Texas came together in prayer to pay their last respects to Mark. Mark's fraternity brothers, classmates, and childhood friends remembered him.
He was a really just all-around type guy. He just was really friendly to everybody. He always went out of his way to talk to people.
I want to remember Mark, the good times we had. The good person he was. The kind of brother that would give you his shirt off his back.
Another memorial service followed at St. Luke Catholic Church in Brownsville, drawing more than 1,200 attendees. Many wore yellow ribbons with the words, "Miss you, Mark," written on them. Through their sorrow, Mark's parents showed remarkable grace and strength. Instead of holding hatred towards those responsible, they chose forgiveness. Jim told the press they were not angry with their son's killers, saying he hoped that if they ever reached heaven, they could apologize to Mark there. Helen, who was equally compassionate, urged people to pray for the murderers.
Mark was just a good young fella. The way he was, the way we were when we were with him, he made us proud. We loved him a lot.
He just must be possessed by the devil. That would be the only explanation for such bizarre and, for what they did.
I think they'll never really ask for forgiveness for what they did. I hope they do someday. Because someday I'd like them to go up and apologize to Mark.
Really, we're at peace knowing that Mark is safe and are with our Lord. And now it's just a matter of all of us. We're going to miss him a lot.
Mark's remains were laid to rest at Mount Olivet Catholic Cemetery in Dickinson, Texas. His tombstone bears a heartfelt message that shows the deep love and pride his family felt for him. It reads, "We are proud of Mark, and we thank God for the way Mark was and the way we were when with him. Mark is with God. Do not be sad for Mark. Be sad for yourselves and us, because another good man is missing from our world. He was a best friend to all."